Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Imperial Guard Tactics video. So, back in sort of 6th and 7th edition, a popular sort of tactic for, and 5th edition I will admit, a popular tactic for the Imperial Guard was the power blob, or just in general an infantry assault army. And with the changes in 8th edition, that has been made a lot harder to achieve. Typically now, it's generally a lot more sensible and, to be fair, cheaper to just run a blob of conscripts, 30 or 40 of them, and all you need is a single commissar and a single officer, and you can put out 120 shots from that conscript unit and they're not going to ever run away. So, without a doubt, it's very cost effective to now have shooty conscripts. But, is there a way to still do the good old fashioned bayonet charge? You know, just here's 100 guys, 200 guys, charging out across you. You've got 1 to 2 turns to stop them. After that, I'm going to be in amongst you, stabbing you up, bayonet charging you down. Is that still possible? And number one, is it still worth doing? Number two, I say, is it still worth doing? Well, let's take a look at some of the sort of issues that we've got. The first one I've already mentioned, it's kind of easier just to shoot people to death now. Number two, we can't really take power blobs anymore. Because you can't blob infantry squads up. You know, you can only take infantry squads as individual squads. So, the day of the power blob is gone. And so that, it's still possible to create a power blob, it's just not as straightforward. I guess it's hard to put your finger on it, but it's just not quite the same. Because essentially what you'd have to do now is take 2 or 3 infantry squads separately, give them the power weapons as normal, give them the special weapons as normal, melter guns, flamer guns, whatever, and you'd have to try and keep them all in range of a single commissar. It's with the way casualties are removed and the way units can consolidate and pile in. It's actually quite hard to keep 3 to 4 units in range of a single commissar. So that it's not as easy to do it with infantry squads. And obviously, commissars are now easier to kill in some respects, because previously your opponent would have to shoot the unit, he'd have to try and get a 6 to hit, and then you'd have to try and wound your commissar with like a sniper weapon we're talking about, and then you would get a lockout sir, and then you'd get an armor save. Whereas now, snipers can just target your commissar because you can't join a unit, and if they get a 6 to hit wound, it's a mortal wound straight through, and you've only got a 5+ armor save anyway. So it's harder to achieve with infantry squads. Another bit of a bummer, another bit of a problem is the changes to weapon skill. So previously, if you charge, there's always a good argument to be made for having close combat conscripts, because they would actually hit most things in close combat on a 4+ on the old system. Whereas on the new system now, there's no difference between shooting someone because you hit them on a 5+, or attacking them in close combat because you hit them on a 5+. So that's some of the issues that we've got. However, there are some key buffs out there which help. First, what I want to mention is it's actually a lot easier to get into your opponent's lines turn 1, turn 2. It's really easy to now do a turn 2 Imperial Guard mass charge. Back in 6th and 7th edition, it would especially with the way casualties getting removed, it would often take you till turn 3 before you got into combat with the enemy. It was not uncommon for it to take until turn 4 before you got into combat with the enemy. And by then, there probably wasn't a lot left of your own forces. Now, it's really to get a turn 2 charge. This is partly because deployment zones tend to be a lot close together. And also partly because we can now move and advance, so move and run, and then we can use move to do the same thing again, which means a minute, and because characters get taken from the back now, that means the minimum distance a squad of infantry or blob of conscripts will move forward is 14 inches in one turn. On average, it'll be 19 inches. That's incredible. Another advantage that we now have is we can soften the enemy up using our infantry units. So previously, what you had to do was take 100 to 200 infantry as your close combat forces, and then spend the rest of your points on support elements that would soften the enemy up before you got there, because there's no point in just charging everyone across the field to come across a fresh enemy unit. You're going to struggle. So often you'd have to take things like basilisks and manticores and heavy weapon teams. Now we don't necessarily need to do that. The reason for this being is you can shoot someone, you can rapid fire them, you can do what you want, and you can still charge them. So more often than not, what I've found when I've tried doing a couple of bayonet charges, which have been moderately successful, I still won the games, still worked. What I found I would do is turn 1, I would move, and just sprint across the field, get everyone up into my opponent's faces, turn 1. Turn 2, move forward another 6 inches, which means on average I'd moved about 25 inches. At that point, I'm well in my opponent's lines. And then I'd be like, okay, well, I'm only 2 or 3 inches away from my opponent, sometimes 3 or 4. Not a huge distance. I'll unload, I'll rapid fire, I'll give them a good volley. You give them a good volley, you soften them up nicely, then you charge in. Because there's nothing stopping you from first rank fire, second rank firing your opponent, putting 4 shots down per lasgun, and then cleaning up what's left in close combat. Nothing stopping you from doing that. So that's how you. That's one way of doing it. That's first sort of tip is sprint, turn 1, move and shoot and charge turn 2. That should be generally possible using Imperial Guard now. There's a few. Once you've made it to combat, there's a few ways you can buff your guys to make them more effective. Because one thing we've got to mention is we no longer get +1 attack from charging. So if you've got 1 conscript, that's only 1 attack. If you've got 30 conscripts, that's only 30 attacks. In previous editions, that would have been 60 attacks. And now you're only hitting on 5 instead of hitting on 4s. So it is harder. But you can now use Warhit Priests now give you an extra attack. So any unit, especially if you're using Uriah Jacobus, basically any unit within 6 inches of a priest, or any model within 6 inches of a priest, gets +1 attack. So that can be used to get the extra attacks that you need, which is really, really good. You can then combine that with someone like Yarick, who gives you rerolling 1s to hit in close combat, and you have quite an effective combo. It might be hard to pull off with a full bayonet charge, but what I found to be quite effective is I had 2 units of 40 conscripts, and I used a priest, which I just used I used Uriah Jacobus's rules, and I had Yarick, and I just charged across the battlefield. Turn 1, turn 2, moved and shot, and then charged, and I had basically. I've taken a few casualties, but I had about 40 attacks per unit, re-rolling 1s. It's actually pretty effective. It wasn't game changing, but it was pretty effective. It did limit my Space Marine opponent's shooting next turn. So I just multi-charge loads of stuff. So that's how you want to do it. You need to, when you get there, you need to be able to make sure that you're actually able to do damage. You need characters. You need those funky combos to make things work. Because if you don't, it's just no point. If you just think, oh, I'll just take some conscripts and some commissars and that'll do, you're just going to be disappointed. You guys are going to spend, the first few turns of the game charging across the field, only to finally make it to the enemy in tatters and do 0 damage before dying. So you need your characters. You need to find some way of getting rerolls. You need to find some way of getting more attacks on you guys. You can also use Strachan. So you can use Strachan as well. So you can have Strachan plus Uriah Jacobus or / a priest buffing conscripts around them. And if those conscripts are Catan conscripts, that's great. So overall, it is... And also, it's important if your opponent decides he wants to stay in combat rather than... Your opponent might also be semi-close combat orientated, so he might decide to stay in combat rather than fall back. If your opponent does decide to stay in combat, in your next turn, you can use fixed bayonets to get an extra round of attacks in. It's really important. Now, with all that said, it's a lot more effort. It's a lot cool. Let's be honest. It's much, much cooler. Rule of cool favours the bayonet charge, guys. It's kind of boring, kind of bland, kind of towish. I'm gonna, not a great insult, but it's kind of like being a Tau player. If all you do is sit there and gun line with your conscripts and just get 4 shots turned from them. It's kind of easy. Doesn't necessarily require a lot of thinking. Kind of Taoish. We don't want to be Tau players, do we, guys? We want to be guard players. There's nothing more iconic than a guard bayonet charge. I've always loved bayonet charges. Always when it's not necessarily the greatest or most strategic option, I just love pulling off a good bayonet charge. So you might be asking yourself, well, apart from rule of cool, let's say I'm in a tournament, I just want to win. Why would I even bother with trying to get into combat with my enemy? It's a good point. My answer to you would be to stop them from shooting. Imperial Guard are really, really good at shooting now, but there will still be some armies out there or some matchups out there which may be able to outshoot us. When Tau players get their act together and start figuring out that mass fire wars is really good, it might actually get to the point where we're no longer the king of shooting anymore. And in that case, we need to start finding ways of taking away our opponent's advantage. And sometimes all you need is for just to buy 100 conscripts, throw them at enemy gun line, and just tie multiple units up in combat for a turn, force them to fall back so they don't get to shoot you, and just whilst they're busy with that wave of conscripts coming at them in their face, your other units can move around, claim objectives, play to the maelstrom, play to the mission. So that is a big, big factor in taking close combat conscripts. Sometimes you need to take those 100 guys, those 120 guys, and you just write them off as acceptable losses. It's kind of harsh, but it's very Imperial Guard. There's nothing quite like an Imperial Guard, it being just as planned. You're sending 100 men to their deaths and you win the mission just because your opponent was so busy with 100 guys as swarming his units. It's very Guard. So that's it, guys. So there is a pretty good strategic reason to do a mass bayonet charge. It's often just a massive distraction kind of effects for your opponent, and he kind of has to deal with it, because if he just ignores the conscripts that are charging at him, then he's going to have 100 conscripts tying him up, not doing a lot of damage, but just permanently clogging him up, which is not good. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Please tell me what you think. Have you got any cool bayonet charge stories? This is 8th edition. If you bayonet charged a knight and just killed it with amazing luck, that'd be awesome. But of course, guys, leave a comment. Tell me what you think. And I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.